Good morning, everyone. I'm Jim Martin, along with Kyle Castro. We're kicking off today's seminar with the hope that we can provide a context for discussing the topic of anger as it impacts on soldiers in the context of war. I'm going to take just a few minutes with Carl to highlight a few comments about anger from the perspective of the American Armed Forces. Carl will make a couple of comments about some of the experiences that we have had in the U.S. across a number of our wars and conflicts that reflect on this topic. And then I hope that we can engage with our Ukrainian colleagues in a discussion about their experiences as they try to address some of these issues in what I would call the topic of problematic anger, anger that, in a sense, has negative consequences for soldiers and for others. Go ahead to the next slide. So this is a rather complicated slide. I'm not going to read through all of it, um, but it does address the issue that anger occurs differently at various aspects of military engagements, from the pre-deployment phase where individuals are preparing to go into combat, the actual deployment phase itself when soldiers are engaged, and then subsequently when soldiers come back home. And that there are various issues that people have to struggle with. Um, I'll highlight just for an example the deployment phase of combat, where people may be experiencing very difficult living conditions, where they may be witnessing horrific events, the death of others. They may actually be causing death, killing someone in combat, for example. All of these are opportunities for emotions to come to the fore and to present difficulty, anger being one of the issues that we're talking about here. Go to the next slide. So here, again, thinking about the kind of circumstances that promote anger in soldiers. Some of these may be their own experiences. Some of these may relate to issues with leaders. Others may relate to what's happening more broadly in their environment, in their country. Some of the things that may generate anger include seeing others who are not sharing the same burden that they feel they're sharing. Uh, Again, we'll talk about this from a context of the US. And then there are outcomes that are associated with anger that often become problematic. Issues of desertion or malingering, the abuse of alcohol or other drugs, suicide, various issues with violence that may be generated from anger. So all of these are things to be concerned about here. Next slide. So we know that anger is a frequent emotion seen in soldiers. There have been a number of studies that have looked at this. Again, I'm using the term here, problematic anger, anger that has negative consequences. And one particular study of US soldiers demonstrated about 15 to 16% of soldiers were reporting problematic anger 24 months after separating from military service. It's also important to recognize that there are important cultural and organizational factors that may influence anger and how that anger gets expressed. Next slide. So here is a list of some of the consequences of anger as it affects health and mental health. And again, I'm not going to go through each of these, but for example, often things that occur and the consequence of angry outbursts lead us to feel guilty or ashamed of our behavior. It can have an impact on how we relate to others. It may have an impact on our self-esteem. Sometimes anger causes us to engage in behaviors in excess, as I described earlier, drinking, alcohol, gambling. I know that the issue of gambling, for example, has been of concern for the Ukrainian military. And there's been efforts to limit their access to various online gaming devices. But again, important to think about how this affects not only our health and mental health, but our performance and especially our relationships to others. Next slide. So here we have an example of the various levels, consequences of anger that are experienced by soldiers. We see it in society and governmental kinds of issues. For example, policies about who's going to have to serve in the military, who doesn't, who gets exempted for various reasons. And that can precipitate anger if I feel that there's not equality in giving time and service to one's country, that other people are able to be excused. There may be difficulty in a military organization in terms of feeling about inadequacy of leaders. My leaders not being concerned about my welfare. And again, ways that precipitate anger in the soldier. Issues that are occurring with peers and family, misunderstandings, other issues that get generated. And clinicians see this in terms of those people we end up working with because their behaviors or their actions have led to problematic issues in a unit, and the individual is sent to be seen by a clinician. Next slide. Here again, two articles that one might look at to understand further the impact of anger on military members during wartime experiences. Next slide.
And I would do, Jim, if I could jump in, I just
Yeah,
want
please.
to let everyone know that Dr. Leslie Moreland is actually joined us today, and she is a recognized national and international expert on not just anger, but anger among many other topics, depression, PTSD, trauma. So she's just so Leslie, thank you so much for joining us today and being willing to share your experience. It's very, very much appreciated.
Hal, could you take a moment now and just talk about a couple of examples from America's experience in wartime? And
Yeah, I think
thank you.
it's, as Jim said earlier, and I'll just, so in some ways repeat what Jim says, but say it differently. So I'm not going to say anything that Jim, I don't think, has already said, but anger is a very common emotion. And there's nothing inherently wrong about being angry. Emotions are how we feel. And we have these emotions for a reason. So anger, fear, hate, love, hope, faith. These are all really positive. They're all emotions. We usually think of love as only positive, but we can have love could be negative too, done in an extreme, right? If you just ignore all of the shortcomings of someone and get in an abusive relationship because you love someone. So even positive things like love can have negative emotions. And like anger can also have some positive outcomes too. But generally speaking, anger that's not controlled can lead to bad behavior. It can impact relationships. And Jim mentioned performance, relationships, and mental health, on that slide. And I can't really emphasize that enough. It's also important that, and and Jim and I talk about this all the time offline, that your experiences in the war with Russia is very different than what any American has experienced in recent memory. And so we're always very cautious, like what lessons can we learn from the US that may be applicable? Not a direct mapping on, but what can be applicable? What are there any general principles that we can sort of take away from our experiences that we can share with you and work with you and help you address issues like anger and PTSD and all the other topics that we've been discussing. And I just want you to know we're very sensitive that what you're experiencing, America has never experienced that, what you're experiencing. And Jim mentioned, Vietnam as an example, and Vietnam was our last draft that we had in America, and there was exemptions, as Jim mentioned. There were educational exemptions, there were medical exemptions. You could sort of get out of joining, being conscripted and going to Vietnam by joining the National Guard because there was a political decision at some point during the war not to activate the National Guard and send them to Vietnam. So many people would join the National Guard to get out of going to Vietnam. And these all have implications because people who were serving were very angry. I remember when President Jimmy Carter, I was actually in high school at the time. I'm kind of dating myself. I'm an old guy. I was in high school when Jimmy Carter pardoned all of the Vietnam veterans who fled to Canada because Canada refused to send our what we call draft dodgers back to America to be prosecuted and put in jail. And so Jimmy Carter did a blanket pardon. Was one of the factors that resulted in him not being reelected. But he did that as part of the healing process because Vietnam was a very, very unpopular war. I know this is not the same in the Ukraine, okay? But it's just an example of how anger can come up in many, many different ways when there's this perception of what I will say is unfairness in who is serving and who is sacrificing, who gets out of sacrificing, who gets out of the suffering, right? Americans, I'll just speak by Americans, but my observation is the human being, the human critter is very good at discerning disparities. You got something, I didn't get something. We're really good at that. And and I don't know if it's a survival instinct, but it seems like everybody has this ability to quickly discern you got it better than I've got it. And in the US military, we see that all the time on deployments, we see that all the time in combat. We see it among the services. The Army jokes that the Air Force has it the best because they got all the nice stuff, and and the Marines and the soldiers suffer. So there's this disparity that we're very good at discerning within the services. And that can lead to anger and frustration. And in the slide that and from a clinical perspective, managing anger sometimes can be very, very difficult clinically because as a clinician, you may say, yeah, I get it. I get why you're angry. I'd be angry too, right? So we can sometimes over-identify and also become frustrated. One of the slides Jim also showed, and then I'm going to stop, and I would love to hear from you and Leslie, is anger can be caused by lots of different variables, right? From the individual level, from the family level, from the unit level, from the leadership, from policy. So there are lots and lots of things that can happen that can result in anger, from who has to serve, how did they get out of doing it? And then there's these issues of, the family too, that can also lead to anger. Certainly if the family's not functioning as well as they could, there could be anger and concern around that. And then when you're in this war that you're in that seems to be never ending, it's natural for anyone to say, I might as well just let it all go. I might as well do whatever the hell I want because I'm not going to get out of this alive anyway. So I might as well just enjoy everything I'm doing. And that kind of thinking, that dysfunctional kind of thinking can lead to a myriad of problems. Jim sort of highlighted some of them: gambling, insubordination. What are you going to do? In Vietnam, it was very common. What are you going to do? Send me to Vietnam? I'm already here. I'm going to do what I want. So you literally would have combat soldiers say that, and that can lead to indiscipline issues, not following orders. So all of these things are very common, and I won't say common, I'll say prevalent. They're prevalent in every conflict, no matter how intense. So I'm going to stop there. Leslie, would you like to add anything? And then we have our subject matter experts from the Ukrainian side that we'd love to hear from you as well.
I would just chime in that I've worked a lot with the Vietnam veteran population. So I think some of what you're saying is very accurate. There's also a big stigma with anger. And so people are less likely to self-identify that this is a problem for them. And I would also say that on this, on the scheme of like aggressive behavior being obviously the most intense experience, but what we struggle a lot with, this kind of chronic irritability, where you're kind of moving through the world in just an irritable space and you're hunkering down and trying to not get angry. But the energy to do that also makes you pretty unavailable in many other areas of your life. And so, again, going to the family, the relationships, the parenting, the kids, like you're almost kind of absent because you're so worried that you will become angry or become aggressive. And so, we have seen this play out in ways where the person's coping with it, but in a way that prevents them to actually have a life that can actually have social support. It erodes the social support, which we know is an incredibly protective factor. I think clinically, it's also hard when folks don't want to get treatment. They don't necessarily benefit from treatment if they're so angry all the time. So I work more with folks kind of on the back end a little bit with how PTSD is really creating so many challenges for their life, for their family, for their ability to get up and do the things that they want to do in their life. And so certainly I can chime in as necessary or as interested.
I'm looking to see where Ole went.
Yes,
Yeah,
There he is. There he is. You bloody Zoom moving people around.
yeah.
I don't like that.
Hello, everybody. I will speak in English. It's easy for me because I'm on English channel. I'm Carl, just to facilitate that you already said about thank you for these words. In our biodynamic body-oriented psychotherapy words, we have Walt, we have the same understanding, and it's our one of the strong belief that there is no negative emotion, and anger is just an emotion that we can express when situation is running out of control, and especially anger as an emotion to protect our boundaries. So we use this energy to protect our boundaries, and when any violation of the boundaries, and this lunch I was consulting one unit commander, and he was so angry. He came with this issue that, I'm too I create conflicts constantly. I'm overreactive. I cannot sleep very well. I'm very sensitive. And we found some time periods in his life when he believed that he has been changed. So he had several COVID episodes, and he believed that made 5 vaccinations, and he believed that it make his sensitive to triggers, to any triggers, noise, etc. But now he feel like he is serving about 9 months, and he is very pressed on his squeezed on his service. So he do a lot of very responsible work. He don't allow himself to relax. He cannot delegate. So he took a lot on his shoulders. So he took a lot of burden on his shoulders, and it make him, be very, very angry outside. At least maybe not so okay. He expressed this anger, but behavior is more aggression. Yeah. So we can call as a behavior, it's aggression. And his chin was constantly trembling, you know, and sometimes I perceive this, that he has a lot of sadness and other emotions inside, not only anger. So it can be very mixed state, but his behavior is very, you know, out aggressive reaction. And I think it's also important to see not only aggressive behavior, it's to see anger, but not only anger behind, to see other emotions behind. And of course,
Oleg,
other,
you mentioned,
just to finish.
go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, and another important, I think, definition that we need to be aware, like in military service, what really create problems, it's not anger. It's when it's a rage, when it comes to the, in biodynamic, we call it like instinctual level, when it's uncontrolled reaction that can, you know, you can kill, you can destroy, you know, you can really make actions that that can harm yourself and harm others. And this can be in state of rage. And probably in the ancient time, it was what was called like this combat rage as a berserk state, yeah? So this is like highest level of of the continuum, if you say anger continuum.
Leslie, please jump in.
Oh, no, I mean, I think the dilemma with, I think I would agree with you that what you're describing would be this kind of fight or flight. And of course, a lot of our military are in fight mode as a protective mechanism that is to protect their safety, protect their boundaries. It's a very healthy and in many ways, you know, kind of a primitive response. But, you know, of course, complicated by the fact that you cannot sustain that, and it creates just so many other problems in so many other areas of their life. And but I think we often come at it with first understanding functionally the kind of how this is in some ways, like you're saying, you know, hardwired fight, rage response physiologically. And where do you go from there? Because while there is a benefit and it can be protective in some settings, the kind of destructive nature of it starts to erode away at all the other maybe beneficial things that they have in their life. And that's, you know, certainly with I, you know, refer to the Vietnam population, where I found that the anger was the most destructive piece to their lives, above and beyond even PTSD, because it burned out their social support, it burned out their loved ones, it made it hard for them to get treatment. And I agree that there was a reason why this served them well at one point or another. So I think kind of coming at it from both sides, where there is a reason why we have a fight or flight response. There is a reason why one can experience this intense rage physiologically. Not even, at that point, it's physiologically driven. And how is that also, though, kind of wiping away the thing that will protect you the most, which is often social support, which is often reaching out and getting, you know, support from your combat troops, from your family, whatever it may be. And so, you know, it's hard to try, you know, I think the treatment really is to kind of thread that needle of respecting and understanding the value of anger and the purpose it serves and the function it serves, and then also being thoughtful about how destructive it can be in terms of a path to a sustainable life that has some, you know, some positive aspects as well. And I think that's important. And again, going back to the Vietnam era, where the rage it made sense. Some of what was happening was not okay. And, you know, we learn as we go. And, you know, obviously we have different war eras since then here in the US. But I do think that that's a really big part of the treatment is not just changing the behavior, but first understanding, like, functionally what it, you know, the function it's serving, and how do we then have a way to kind of be thoughtful about reducing it in the areas that it's not helpful and it's very destructive. I also want to say that the anger piece has such a strong physiological component. I mean, we talk about it as emotion, we talk about it as a behavior with aggression, And there's this physiological piece that I think is in many ways the most important piece, because treatment in any other way, if you don't kind of get that physiological piece to kind of calm down a little bit, it's really hard to address, the emotions and the behaviors. And that's a lot of what our research has shown. And so I just think it's complex.
One of the things that Leslie and Ola, that you said that I think really needs to be reinforced or appreciated, let me use that word instead, is that a lot of times when people have chronic anger, they feel justified in being angry. And that's like at a cognitive level as well. So they feel justified. I have a right to be angry. This is what happened to me. And, clinically, you're like, okay, I get that, right? It's so sometimes, where you start, in the treatment is really going to be highly dependent on how deeply ingrained that anger is. And I just can't stress enough that many, many folks who have chronic anger feel that that anger is working for them, that it is allowing them to be successful and to carry on. And so that again is a cognitive, a physiological, social, because who likes to be around angry people? Very few people like to be around someone who's constantly angry, constantly on edge. You have to kind of tiptoe around them. And this then erodes relationships and that social support that Leslie was talking about. I'm sorry, Oli, go ahead, jump in there. I've said enough.
I'm just thinking that we have also to define on what stage of if we will take, let's say, combat actions. Yeah. So on what stage, how much adaptation, like how much adaptive skill is anger or rage. So I would say the more danger, the more anger. Yeah. So like it's very adaptive skill, like already was said, like this fight response. We need such kind of folks that can fight despite all conditions. Yeah. So they can overcome the challenges. They can be like emotionally fit for this. For the fight, to kill, to protect, to everything. So rage is pretty, I would say, welcome. It's pretty welcome if you have, of course, if it's supported by skills. Yeah. So if you have your combat skills, you have your communication skills, and you can behave in a group, you can fight in a group, not be a lone ranger and just come into the rage. And we have examples when people, they start fighting one, they don't see surroundings, and they die because they are not aware of different dangers from above. But when there is, for example, more quiet period, like you come back for some short recovery, restoration, reconditioning, of course, it's important to regulate your emotion. And there are a lot of body mind methods. In my opinion, it's very important, but also other methods that support this regulation. So you can regulate your physiology. You can get some meaning out of what is going on. And in my experience, I did a lot of debriefings, like using different models, also our models like combat path debriefing, but other. And especially when it comes to very fresh periods, like, in the morning, this group gets out of the trenches, and they are tired. Some of them, did not have possibility to sleep. And then I'm invited as a psychologist to work with the group. And I call this 12 angry men, so they just group anger. So they are just angry, and they angry about lack of everything, first of all. So they are frustrated, they are angry, and how to behave in this, how to contain anger, not like you mentioned, not fight back, respect their anger, allow the space, and very important, allow the space. And usually after being with them, speaking with them, allowing this anger to be, like usually calming down happening. So in my experience.
Oleg,
And yeah.
your example of the commander, I think was a very powerful example of thinking about when does anger become problematic. It would be interesting to hear from some of your Ukrainian colleagues some of their experiences in the same fashion with people they may have worked with, where anger becomes problematic and how they've gone about trying to help them. Maybe you could encourage from some of
Volodymyr.
your
And someone
colleagues.
has their
Volodymyr.
hand up. Someone has their hand raised, but I can't
Yeah,
read that name.
Volodymyr.
Oleg, can you read the name?
Volodymyr.
Oh,
Volodymyr.
yeah. Oh,
Вітаю, шановні колеги,
Greetings,
дякую за
dear colleagues.
запрошення.
Thank you
Олеже,
for inviting me here.
тема для мене дуже цікава. От
The topic
зараз
is very
перепрошую, я
interesting
в
for me.
автомобілі тільки-но
I'm
завершився
sorry, I'm
тренінг,
in a
де ми
car.
працювали з
I have
лікарями, з
just finished a
цивільними
training
лікарями.
where we
Це
worked
тренінг
with
якраз
civilian
того,
doctors.
як
This was
працювати
a
з
training
емоційними
of how you can
станами.
work
І я
with
намагався дослідити, тобто ми
different
відпрацьовували різні
psycho-emotional
кейси, в
states.
числі
We
пов'язані
were
з проявами
looking into different
агресивності.
cases, among other
Власне,
things,
що відбувається з
expressions of
військовими,
anger,
і
and we
зворотній
were
зв'язок від
discussing
лікарів.
what is happening with
Наступне,
the military
що
staff members,
зараз у
and
нас
the
вільний
doctors
цивільний
are giving
простір, тобто
the
багато
following feedback,
військових
because
звертаються
we
за
have free
медичною
civilian
допомогою до
space,
цивільних
and a
лікарів.
lot of military
І
staff
лікарі
members go to
кажуть,
civilian
що
doctors for help.
порівняно з цивільними
And the
людьми,
doctors say
військові
that
краще
compared to the
контролюють агресію
civilians,
в цій
the military
повсякденній
staff
поведінці.
members better
Тобто в
control
тих
aggression in the
моментах
everyday life,
взаємодії з лікарями,
in
вони
when they
відмічають,
interact
що
with the
військові
doctors.
мають кращий
So
контроль
the doctors
агресії,
say
менше
that the military people have
неконтрольованих
better
проявів.
control over
В той же
aggression
час
and
іншою
fewer
особливістю
uncontrolled
відмічають те, що
expressions.
є
Another
дуже
peculiarity that they
загострене
noted
почуття
is that
несправедливості
they have
і
a
реакція
very strong
на
feeling
прояви
of
соціальної
injustice.
несправедливості. Те, що
They have very strong reaction to the
говорив
social
Карл,
injustice,
наприклад, коли
as Carl
хтось
has
на
mentioned,
фронті, хтось не на
when
фронті,
some people have to fight in the front line,
і
other
несправедливих
people are
рішень
in the rear,
командування чи
and
керівництва.
they feel
І
injustice
проблема є
with some
загострюється в тому,
decisions of
що
their leadership,
більшість військових, які
and
зараз
the
в
problems are
українській армії, це
exacerbated
є люди, які
because
свідомо
most of the
обирали кар'єру
military
військового і
staff members,
звичні до військової
they have not
системи. Це
conscientiously
вчорашні
decided
цивільні
to go to
люди,
the military.
мобілізовані, і
These
вони
people
досить
were
гостро
civilians
реагують
yesterday.
на те,
They
як
have been
якщо
mobilized,
щось
enlisted
відбувається
into
в війську
army,
не так,
and they have
як
very strong
мало би
reactions
бути.
if something is happening in the army,
Дуже
if something wrong is happening.
відгукується та думка про
I
нормальність
have,
агресії і про необхідність
I
її
support the idea
фізіологічного
that
і
aggression is a
психологічного
normal
прояву, який
reaction,
тобто часто
and we
агресія
have to
звучить
normalize
якраз
it,
як
because very
негативні
often
конотації,
when we say the word
але
aggression, we usually have a
для
negative connotation
розвитку,
to it.
для експансії
But
своїх думок,
in
ідей,
order to develop and
багато
to
чого
expand
іншого,
our thoughts and
маємо проявляти
ideas,
цю нормальну агресію в
we have to
цивілізованих,
express
соціально
normal aggression
прийнятних проявах.
within
Під
the
час війни
civilized,
відбувається по-іншому, і
socially
люди, які
acceptable
воюють,
boundaries.
мають
But during the
вбивати
war,
ворога,
we have a
знищувати
different
ворога.
situation.
Те, що
People
сказав
in the
Олег,
army
це
have to fight. They have to
відповідно
kill the enemy. As Oleg has mentioned,
3 років війни, що багато людей,
after
які
2-3
вчора не
years of
відчували
war,
в собі
a lot
такої
of
здатності,
people
вони зараз
who didn't feel
стають гарними
capable
солдатами,
of
але
fighting,
ця
now
навичка,
they are
вона
becoming good soldiers.
не
But
для
this
всіх
skill
доступна. Як
is not
психіатр,
available for everybody.
що ми біологічно
As a
різні,
psychiatrist, I can
відповідно,
say
можемо
that people
витримувати
are
різний рівень
biologically different,
напруження, різний рівень
and
дофаміну.
they can sustain
Ментально доведено, що людина, яка
different
має
level
схильність, наприклад, до
of stress.
шизофренії, це означає,
So
що її
if a
нейрони не
person
зможуть
is
витримати
inclined to
концентрацію
schizophrenia,
дофаміну, яку можуть
their
витримати
neurons will not be
люди
able to
здорові.
withstand
Тому
the
є
dopamine concentration
біологічна планка,
compared to a healthy
якої
person.
людина
So
не
there
може
is a
перейти.
biological threshold
Випадку,
which
якщо
cannot be passed.
ситуація призводить
And
до
if a
більшої напруженості,
situation is more
в прояві,
stressful,
то просто це може призводити до
this may
провокації
lead
захворювання.
to
Але
start
якщо
of a
витримує, то
mental
тоді питання
disease.
якраз тих
But
біологічно
if the person can
базованих,
sustain
але
the stress,
психологічних
this is a
механізмів,
question
як краще
of
контролювати агресію.
biological and mental mechanisms
З
of
іншого боку,
aggression
те, що говорила
control.
Леслі про
On the other hand, as Leslie has
утримання
mentioned
агресії, актуально
about
зараз
hiding
для багатьох
aggression,
людей, які не є
this
військовими,
is relevant for
але
many people who are not serving in the
переважна
army,
більшість українських людей відчувають злість
but
на
a lot of
на ворога,
Ukrainian
який
people
прийшов
feel
в нашу
anger
землю, напав
against
на
the
нашу
enemy
країну.
who has come to our
І
land,
в цьому
who
сенсі
attacked our
військових є
country.
більше можливості
And is in this regard,
реалізовувати цю агресію
military people
адекватним
have
чином,
more
чого
possibilities
не
to
завжди є
express this
у
aggression
цивільних людей.
and realize this
І ця
aggression
стримувана
in a
агресія,
relevant
і
way,
це
which
дослідження,
civilians often don't have.
з
And the
людьми, які постраждали від
suppressed
війни
aggression.
в Луганській,
So
Донецькій областях,
we had a research with people who suffered from the war in Luhansk and Donetsk region back in 20. We started back in 2015, and it showed that with the time, when people suppress aggression over a long time, it has psychosomatic expressions later, and they become more aggressive, according to the Van Boren theory about the serotonin depression related to anger and blockage. So practically, what we have been doing from the beginning of the war with the military and civilians, we are doing programs and trainings on how to work with the entire spectrum of your emotions, as Carl has mentioned, with aggression, which is very important and is very helpful in preventing the negative behavioral expressions such as addictions or chemical addictions or other compensation mechanisms that can later become very negative for the person and for the society in general. So we used to have this experience even before the full-scale invasion. We used to work with the sportsmen, with athletes, and this is always a work aiming to have a good level of aggressiveness as well as a good ability to control your aggression to achieve good results. Thank you.
Is there someone else who would like to just share experiences that they've had with the Ukrainian military, with service members, where anger has become a problem, as Oleg pointed out with his consultation with the commander? Oleg, can you help us maybe generate some more discussion?
Okay. Maybe there is not only a problem. I would also say that there is some recommendation in our, let's say, manuals. There is some recommendation that, for example, when you have casualties in the unit, so like don't go so much with the sadness and sorrow. Try to shift to the anger, like anger, okay, we lost our comrades, but we will revenge for them, you know, we will fight back. And then anger become as some kind of protective emotion for others, because like there is no enough time to process, for example, grief, and anger as a grief substitute probably for the same time. This what is happening and what is recommended. One of my interesting, there is one interesting example of Volodymyr said that not everybody like is biologically fit to fight, like be a combatant. And I have a comrade who was a year ago, he was so scary to go, on the combat positions and stay there, and he constantly was making some supportive work, like some logistic, other stuff, driving vehicles, like fixing, everything, hard work, but not fight. But and he was, how to say, bullied by his comrades. Okay, you are not going, we are fighting also for you, like, etc., etc. And it was very, like, interesting for me. Like, few months ago, he become very experienced, not like infantry soldiers, but shooting from this, I don't know how AHS сказати, like mortar-like weapon, and and he becomes so addicted, I would say, to this life, combat life. So he was staying like much longer that usually soldiers stay and on the positions, and so he got really, he started getting some pleasure, I think, pleasure out of that, and maybe some anger. I don't know if anger. I need to have a nice interview with him, because, like, this is very interesting topic of the person who was not fit and became fit after a long time, but it took some long time, and he was growing. I would say he is growing as a man, as a soldier, infantry soldier, in very good company, even with some bully people, but like in very good company, in very good leadership, and very good role models outside. So he could constantly rely on some people who was around him. Volodymyr, ти ще маєш? Volodymyr, you have, and please, Ukrainians, come and speak. Join us, because we want to really shift our format of our webinars into more discussion type meetings, not so much as lecture type. So please join us.
Олеже, я би хотів ще одним кейсом поділитися.
I would like to share one more experience.
Це цікаве спостереження для мене, як для психіатра, було кілька
For me,
консультацій
as
людей, які
a
мають
psychiatrist, was
клінічно
interesting
виразні тривожні
to
розлади. І ці тривожні
have
розлади,
several
вони були
consultations
ще
with
до
people
того, як вони
with
були мобілізовані.
anxiety
В нормальних умовах,
disorders,
мабуть, такі
and the
люди
level of
пройшли
their
б
anxiety disorder
відбір,
was higher
стали б військовими,
before
але в умовах
demobilization.
повномасштабного вторгнення вони опинилися в війську.
These
І
people
я
ended
консультував
up
їх як
in the
психіатр,
armed
коригуючи їх
forces
лікування,
after
проводячи
the
психотерапію,
large-scale
причому
invasion,
двоє
and
з
I
них були
provided them
консультовані
psychiatric
в умовах клініки, а
consultations,
двоє безпосередньо практично на
and
позиціях.
two of
І
them were
цю
actually on the
ідею,
combat
цю гіпотезу мене
positions.
навело, коли я побачив свого
And
клієнта, з яким я тільки
when
що розмовляв про його
I
симптоматику, і
saw
зазвичай в цивільному
my
житті ці
client
люди
with whom I was
лякаються тіні,
discussing
то
his
через 5
symptoms, and
хвилин після
usually
завершення
such people are
консультації я
afraid
побачив
of
його
their
в бойовому
own shadows.
облаштунку, коли він приходив
And
на
then
4 дні на
5
позицію,
minutes
такий термінатор,
after the
на якому
consultations,
завішено
I
там
saw
30 кілограмів
him
зброї і
in
всього
all
іншого,
his
і він там
combat
буде сам тримати цю
equipment ready to
позицію
go
кілька
on
днів.
the combat position,
І
which he would
всі
have to
вони
hold
були
on his
ефективними
own for
воїнами,
several
незважаючи на
days.
наявність
And
клінічно
so
виразного
all
тривожного
these people
розладу. Ну,
were
звісно,
able
з
to
контрольованого
become effective
терапії,
warriors,
який
notwithstanding
достатньо
their
поганим ефектом,
clinical
але
condition.
тим не менше це про те, які мають можливості люди,
So
незважаючи
this
на те,
is
що вони мають
about the
клінічно виразний психічний розлад, і в
capacities of
той же
people
час
which
вони
have
мають
some
достатній
mental
здатності
disorders,
воювати
but
і
they still have enough
навіть, як
capacity
відмітив Олег, навіть
to
отримувати задоволення від бойової
combat,
роботи.
and even, as Oleg mentioned, to enjoy it.
Це певним чином збалансовує. В той же час так само вони
And
реагують
this
на
allows to
екстремальні
balance
ситуації, травматичні
their
події. Це
disorder.
погіршує
But of
стан,
course,
звісно,
any
складаючись
traumatic
на
events
звісному
worsen their conditions.
Only let me pose a question to all of our Ukrainian colleagues who may be dealing with service members and families. My understanding, and this goes back to what Carl and I were talking about in terms of the difference between the Ukrainian war and America's experience. My understanding is that many of your combat soldiers now who have been fighting for 2 years, maybe longer, have small opportunities to get away from the unit, to go back home, to have short periods of rest. But this is a continuous process of coming and going, and these periods are very short. And I'm wondering how your soldiers and their spouses and families deal with this constant sort of changing, going from a high stress combat environment, anger, fighting, aggression, coming back home for a week or 10 days and then going back again. How does this wear or erode the emotions of these soldiers? I hope I'm being clear as I describe this.
Yeah, I hope so. And I can see the raised hand, and maybe Yuri also have some answer to this question, James. Yuri Sidorek, please.
Доброго дня. Я не на останнє запитання, а на попереднє чувствую. На мій погляд, більшою проблемою з гнівом є, коли він дуже тривалий. Бо коли він короткочасний, чи інші
I'm not hearing the interpretation.
Neither am I.
Sorry, I was in the wrong channel. The problem about the anger when it lasts for a long time, the short-living anger is not that of a problem.
Але якщо тривале, це буде сильне порушення функціонування.
And long-lasting anger causes a deep disorder of functioning of the individual. Can you hear me?
Yes.
З моїх спостережень, це і довготривалий виникає тоді, коли довготривалий час не вирішується проблемна ситуація.
And my observation is that this long-lasting kind of fear appears when there is no solution to the situation for a long time, or there are no attempts to solve it.
Or promises that are not kept.
Різні проблеми, самі різні.
The problems could be various.
Я перепрошую, бо я не чую перекладу, тому не чую, чому я переклала.
Sorry, I couldn't hear the interpretation. That's why I pause, because I expect the interpretation to follow what I say.
Дякую.
Thank you. What else did I want to say?
Юрію, чи ви завершили?
Так.
Yuri, have you finished, or would you like to add something? Yes, I've done. I said what I wanted to say.
Дякую.
Thank you.
And there's another hand raised.
Доброго дня, я так розумію, що я можу говорити. Мене звуть
Good
Ірина Яворська,
afternoon.
я
I am
психолог,
Irina
психотерапевт,
Yavorska.
також
I am a
тренер Всесвітньої
psychotherapist and
організації охорони здоров'я з деяких
psychologist.
програм
I
психічного
also
здоров'я.
take part in the
І,
mental
на жаль,
health
маю
training
досвід
programs
роботи з
of
нашими військовими і їх
WHO.
родинами
And I
з
also
цього
have
боку в
experience of
цивільній
working
медицині ще з
with
2014 року.
our servicemen
Я
and their
працювала в
family
Дніпропетровському
members
регіоні, ми
since
приймали тоді хлопців з
2014.
Іловайську і Дебальцево, а
I
пізніше
worked
вже
in the
працюючи в
east
різних
of
установах,
Ukraine,
я хочу
and
сказати, що
I had experience of working
свого
with the
досвіду бачу декілька
military
таких
who came from
основних історій, які стосуються
Ilovaisk
взаємовідносин
pocket.
наших
In
військових з їх
general, as
родинами.
regards
Погоджуюсь з
the
попередніми людьми, які
relations
виступали, які казали,
between
що більшість наших
the
хлопців
servicemen
не
and
збиралися
their
ставати
families,
військовими,
I
тим більше не
agree with
збиралися
other
брати
speakers
зброю і йти
today that
вбивати. І
most
для того,
of the
щоб
servicemen
здійснити
didn't
цей
have any
внутрішній такий
intention to take the
перевернення свого
arms and
світу,
go to kill
потрібно
somebody.
було, щоб було
And in
зроблено дуже
order
багато
for
чого.
this
Наприклад, потрібно
transformation
було
to occur,
виключити свої
a
емоції
lot had
для
to
того,
be
щоб
done,
там бути
including
менш
switching off your
розчувленим. І
emotions
виключається перш за
so
все це
that one
емоції про
becomes
дуже
less
чуттєве,
sensitive
добре,
and
лагідне,
but
те, що
this
тебе
means
робить
switching off
безпомічним,
the
беззахисним.
feelings of
І люди
tenderness,
збираються
of
і залишають собі
kindness,
тільки
what
агресію,
makes you
залишають собі тільки гнів, які
defenseless
допоміжні.
and
На
vulnerable.
жаль,
And so these people
так як
keep
і наші
only
хлопці, які
anger
не
because it
збиралися ставати
helps
військовими,
them.
їх родини
And
ніколи не
unfortunately,
збиралися
the
відчувати те, що вони
families of these
відчувають.
people
Вони
had
отримують
no
ситуацію,
intention
яка
to experience what they
їх
have to
теж,
experience, and
мабуть,
they
дуже-дуже
live
розчавлює,
in
рве
a
на шматочки.
situation
Бо з одного боку
which
ти дуже сильно
basically
переймаєшся за свою
destroys
рідну
them
людину,
because
яка
on
там
one hand
під кулями, а з іншого
you
боку,
are
коли ти маєш
worried
невеличку
about your
змогу з нею
loved one,
поговорити, ти маєш
which
людину,
is
яка дуже
being currently all
закрита,
the
яка
time
ні про що не
under
хоче
attacks,
говорити,
and
нічим
then
не
when you
хоче
find
ділитися,
those
і більше
few
того,
minutes
чогось
to be
вдруг
together,
не
this
хоче
person
чути
doesn't
про
want to
ці
share
самі
anything
дорогі і
with
самі
you.
чуттєві
And for
моменти.
some
Про
reason,
те, як
this
зростає
person
твоя
even
дитина, про те,
doesn't
що кажуть
want
твої діти, про те,
to
що
hear
роблять. І
anything
тоді,
about
здається,
your child
з'являється оце
growing, about
відчуття,
the tenderness,
нібито між
about
нами
love of
розірвався
others,
зв'язок. Між
and
нами
this
втрачено дуже
makes
багато різних
people
суттєвих,
feel that the
важливих речей.
connection
І якщо
with
в
their loved
хлопців
one
є
is broken.
ще
And
ті
so
речі, які
if
формують
the
стійкість, оце
if
про
the
те, що
guys
говорив
still
пан
have
Володимир,
those
що вони
aspects
можуть,
which
незважаючи на
help
свій стан, на
them
свої
hold
додаткові
together,
захворювання, через якусь ідею
thanks
захисту
to
своїх
which
близьких, через оці
they
такі
are
цінностні речі,
able
вони
on the
можуть збиратися
basis
і
of
йти.
their
То з цього боку
values
родин
to
оцієї
go
цінностної
forward.
історії
The
взагалі начебто
families do not
немає, і
have,
вона начебто
it seems that they
втрачається. Бо
do
саме
not have
головне
these values
рятувати
and
наших
they
дітей, тоді
lose
почуй про них,
the
а він не
main
може їх
value
чути. На жаль, я маю
they have,
зв'язок
because
з
if
великою
you
кількістю
go to
військових
defend our
і
children, then why
знаю, що
don't
є
you
багато
want to
таких
hear
ситуацій, коли
about
наші
them?
хлопці,
I'm in
маючи
contact with
відпустку, не
many
їдуть додому.
military men,
Бо
and I
дуже
know
часто
about many
відбувається така ситуація, коли ти
servicemen
приїжджаєш додому,
that
ти все
do
одно
not
пробивають
want to
тебе ті
go
почуття,
home
коли ти бачиш свою дитину,
for
коли вона
leave,
тебе
even
обіймає, і
if
так
they
далі, і так
have
далі.
the
Ти
right
коли
to do it,
повертаєшся,
because
не
when
можеш
you
ще
come
раз
back home
зробити те, що ти
and
робив перший
you
раз. Ти не можеш
have
виключити
all
ці
this
емоції і
intimate
стаєш уразливим.
contact and these
Я знаю теж
embraces, you
безліч
become vulnerable
ситуацій,
and you
коли
are not
хлопці, які
able to
приїхали
go
додому,
back
перед
and
тим
keep
перебували
doing
місяці
what
на
you were
самих
doing.
гарячих
And
точках,
I know
були
some guys who
зібрані
spent
і
months
виходили
in the
цілими,
hottest
приїжджали і навіть в дуже
locations
простих
and did
ситуаціях
it
були
well,
поранені або було
but
ще
then
щось. І я
after
думаю, що в нашій зараз
going
спільноті
home
дуже
and coming
великий
back,
оцей
they got
геп, оце
wounded and
недолік,
had
те,
some
що ми не
challenges
маємо
even
оцієї
in the
достатньої
much
комунікації,
simpler
показувати, що
situations. And I
відбувається з
think the
військовим,
reason is
і що
that is
це
the lack of
рятує йому
communication, that
життя.
we have to
Оце
explain
виключення
what is
емоцій,
happening with
оце
our servicemen,
концентрація на
and that
гніві
this
і можливість так
freezing
збиратися
of
і бути там
emotions
цілим.
help
І те, що
saves their
немає
lives,
цієї
and
комунікації з родиною,
the
яка
fact
повинна
that
розуміти,
there
як
is
мені
no
здається, про те, що буде
communication with the
відбуватися,
family
як відбуватися оця
is
історія.
not good, because
На
they
жаль,
should
я
understand
думаю,
what
що
is happening
той
and
геп,
how
який ми
does it
маємо
work.
сьогодні,
And I think
дуже
the
сильно
gap
погано
that we
відобразиться тоді, коли ми
today
закінчимо
will
війну перемогою,
will bring very negative consequences after the victory, when the families will be reunited, but there will be walls of misunderstanding and miscommunication in these families. And I agree with the previous speakers who were saying that if you go back home but you don't have space to contain your anger, everything is challenging. And this is something we are trying to teach everyone who has to do with the servicemen. And our general practitioners, psychologists should try to share this understanding with families, because this is something which could heal the relationships and allows the servicemen to be accepted back at home as aggressive and different than before. Thank you.
I just wanted to echo what you're saying, that this complicated task of coming home, and it's not a switch that you can kind of turn off and on. And what we have found is at home, the anger isn't initially an issue because they're trying to kind of hunker down. But the problem is that there's a lack of emotional availability. There's a lack of ability of any emotions, because the anger is, they're keeping the anger down, and the partner doesn't know how to understand that and is interpreting it often as this person's home, and they're not engaging with me, and they're not engaging with the kids. And then the spouse actually can get very angry and frustrated and kind of then come at the service member, trying to understand why they are not emotionally available. So we have found that dynamic is very problematic over time, and can take a toll on family members, and certainly the next generation if they have children. And so I really want to just agree with you that part of it is just some of the education of how easy or difficult it is to turn things off and on. And so it's not this obvious expression of anger that the service member may have, but it's actually this absence of emotion in order not to maybe show the anger. And then that becomes very problematic with intimacy and things like that. So we definitely work a lot with that here with the family members.
Leslie, can I ask, when you are working with this
Leslie,
anger issue, is it after deployment? Is it in post-deployment setting or? Yep.
So I think that's a really important question, and I have done both. My main job, though, is after deployment, when the threat is no longer there. And I think your description of the threat maybe not necessarily be gone. Maybe they go home for a few days, but really the threat is not necessarily gone because they're going back to the threat, or maybe the threat's ever present. And so that's I think that context is really important. I think one of the challenges you described, like kind of leaning into this role of being able to do your job, and that might require killing and things like that, to protect your boundaries, to protect, whatever you're protecting. My experience is sometimes they can almost overcorrect. And then, the perception of threat is maybe perceived as much higher than it is. And so I think this idea of like, how do folks behave when there's no threat? How do they behave when there is threat? And that kind of being able to shift back and forth. I will say my work with active duty, when it wasn't after the threat, but they would have these deployment cycles. It was very challenging when they would come home, and there was a lot of expectation on the part of the family members of how the person would be. And the person would know that their home time is temporary, and then they're going back out. And so I think that how we would work with that is very different than working with folks who are what we call veterans, where they're no longer going back into the military, but they can't kind of shut that switch off. And we have some good reason to believe that their threat is no longer there. And so that approach is very different than someone where, you know, they're going back out. There is a kind of a constant threat, but the perception and the reality of the threat is what we try to talk about. Because going home to your loved ones, there isn't a threat in theory, but they're still prepared for the threat. And they either, again, are in fight or flight, or they just disengage. And all of those, of course, are problematic for the family members.
Leslie,
I have seen the Yuri hand. Yuri, did you lower your hand, or is it relevant yet?
Бувають різні ситуації.
Well, there are different situations.
Коли просто стосунки закінчились.
Sometimes the relations
Повернення ветерана
may be
додому, це
over.
може не відбуватися через те, що вони просто закінчились, вони не хочуть їсти вдома.
Maybe veterans don't want to go
Хоча
home
офіційно їх не
because
розірвали.
they have finished their relations with
Або є такі
their ex,
випадки,
though
коли
officially those relations may be still
дружина
there.
дивиться, що сусіди не пішли на війну,
Sometimes
ти пішов. Це ти придурок пішов.
your wife can say,
Якщо можна було не йти.
the neighbors didn't go to fight to the war, but why did you go? A silly guy.
Різні випадки. Думаю,
And
що дуже багато
there are many
різних
other
випадків, вони
different
перед
cases,
індивідуально.
and every case is individual.
Ole, let me add to what both your colleague has said and Leslie has said. The importance of education and support for families so that they understand this dynamic, whether it's the episodic coming and going, or it's the veteran returning. Either way, important to help educate family members to understand these dynamics and how to respond to them, and to be supportive of them. The example I think your colleague just gave of a spouse who wonders why their loved one had to fight and the neighbor next door didn't go, the inequity, going back to what Carl has talked about earlier, where people feel they're being treated differently. So in this case, it highlights the importance of providing support for families and education for families so that they understand these dynamics.
Thank you, James. And Carl was raising the hand, then Maria. Carl,
I
are you
will be
Yeah.
very quick. Can folks hear me? Am I breaking up?
I think you're frozen, Carl, yes.
Yeah, you're frozen.
About now? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
A little better, yeah.
The only thing I want to add to all of this discussion is let's not lose sight of the fact that being in combat permanently changes the person who's experiencing the combat experience. They're never going to be the same person again. And I realized I was going to say that earlier and I forgot. The loved one, the partner, they're not going to be the same person. They're a different person now because of the experience that they have had. And I'll just stop there, but I just want to kind of put that out there that they're not going to be the same. The spouse needs part of the education, Jim, when you said that, and Leslie said that, it got me thinking the spouse needs to understand the partner, the family. They're not going to be the same person.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Carl. Maria.
Добрий вечір, товариство.
Good
в
evening,
мене
dear colleagues.
таких два спостереження.
I have
Вони
two
не будуть пов'язані з
observations,
родинами, але
They
є
are
так,
not
в принципі,
connected with the
з
families,
агресією, з
but this is about
власне,
aggression.
що Останні, напевно, що десь рік я
Essentially,
спостерігаю, що якраз
during
ця
the recent
агресія
year,
в військових, і вона причому в бойових, і ті, хто там готується тільки виходити на бойові, під час підготовки. Я помічаю, знаєте, що зляться агресія якраз стосовно по відношенню до командування, до війська, до країни, але дуже рідко зустрічається дуже малий відсоток, коли військових, які кажуть, я, звісно, росіян, які на нас напали. Тобто це така трошки, власне, коли я там вже з ними працюю, так кажу, а причина цього всього, так, напевно, що якось треба зрозуміти, що причина нашого цього, цієї ситуації, цього гніву, це в першу чергу через те, що на нас напала Росія. То одна річ, про яку я так, це такі просто мої думки, знаєте, в голос. А інша штука, яку я помічаю так само, що ми говоримо про агресію як про емоцію, так? А емоцію, яку можна контролювати. Тобто в нас є певні, коли ми відчуваємо гнів, так, ми можемо, є купа варіантів, які ми можемо вибрати, що ми можемо робити. Але, власне, що зустрічається, і то великий відсоток так само є тих хлопців, які вже травмовані. І, власне, що це, коли йде агресія, йде як однією з симптомів ПТСРу. І тоді це такі спалахи гніву, вибух. Так? Коли вони, і це їм дуже важко контролювати, майже неможливо, без медикаментозної допомоги або терапії, а таких хлопців багато вже є. І, власне, що тут в своїй практиці я зустрічала ті моменти, коли вони вибухають на рівному місці, і тут важко з цим працювати так в польових умовах, і коли це ти маєш там 20 хвилин чи 30 хвилин на консультацію.
And it's very difficult to work with that when you have only 20-30 minutes for the counseling session. So these are my thoughts. Thank you.
Володимир?
Володимир.
Пані Марія, дякую за продовження розмови про те, як гнів, які причини гніву у військових і те, що стосується ворога, то відчувається так, що про це, власне, немає про що говорити.
It seems that this is obvious, there is nothing to talk about,
це відбувається, коли
and you need and you can destroy the enemy when you go to fight. As for the other factors, it is difficult to have an influence on them. When you are in the army, you are limited. And here, people verbalize the aggression.
І якщо
Sorry, the connection is interrupted.
Володя перебиває дуже.
Volodymyr, we have no connection.
Я перепрошую, здається, було переривання
I'm
зв'язку.
sorry. I think the connection was interrupted.
Я хотів наголосити на тому, що
I wanted to emphasize that the war is mostly the combat is mostly consisting of artillery shelling.
Зіткненні, то мають контузії не
So,
одну, і це біологічний
people have a lot of concussions or several concussions, and this is a pathological factor which is significantly reducing their capability to contain their anger, because acute trauma and concussions contribute to that.
Володя, спробуй виключити камеру, може тебе буде...
Volodymyr, we are sorry. Maybe you could, because we can't hear you.
Я виключив тут Wi-Fi слабенький, дотягся, і, мабуть, він
I'm
заважає,
sorry,
тому
I
що
have a
здається,
bad,
мобільному до цього було добре.
bad
І повертаючись до теми сім'ї,
connection.
ну, про це
So
теж
going back to
я
the
зараз, як
topic
і
of
військовий,
family,
буду говорити про те, на що важко повпливати і вже неможливо
yes,
повпливати в
there
минулому,
are
тобто це мова
factors
йде про
that are very difficult to influence
таку
or that happened
помилку,
already in the
можливо,
past.
що це помилка, треба про це думати.
So maybe
Що
this is a
керівництво в
mistake
сенсі мобілізації населення в цілому,
in terms
не в
of
сенсі до війська, а в
enlistment of the
сенсі
population in
до
general,
залученості у
not enlistment to the
захист
army,
країни,
but
тому що
engagement of the
в
population to
якихось
protecting
регіонах, в яких
their
війна не так
country,
дуже торкається,
because some regions have
цивільне
been
життя,
spared from the
і
war,
за
and the
рахунок
civilian
цього
life
збільшується
continues there,
прямо прірва між тим,
and because of
як себе
that,
почуває військовий,
this gap
і
is
що
growing
відбувається там в цивільному
for
житті,
the
а
military,
особливо,
for the
якщо
feeling
це
when they look what is happening at what is
не
happening in the
так
civilian
залучена
life,
сім'я в цей процес
or if the
допомоги.
family is
В
not
багатьох
very
сім'ях,
much
які
involved
інтегровані в спільноту,
in
волонтерську
the
спільноту,
support,
і
because a lot of family members have been integrated into the volunteer community,
власне, бачу
and they
менший
constantly help
ступінь
to the
є
military.
взаємодія, є
And in this
взаєморозуміння
family, there is a
між
better
чоловіком і
understanding,
дружиною,
better
вона
engagement and interaction between
багато
husband and
чого,
wife,
і дотичного до його роботи, вони якби разом
because she
воюють,
can understand a
хоча
lot
вона
of
в
things.
тилу,
And in his work,
а
they
коли ні,
seem
то
to
ні.
be
Але ж,
on the
ну,
front
це
together, though
буває
she
і
is in the
в
rear and
звичайному
he
житті,
is in the
що
front.
в родині
But of
люди
course,
трохи розходяться своїм
there
шляхом.
can be other
Ми
families
проводили
where people can part
рік
their
тому
ways.
вебінар на тему
A year
фамілія
ago,
модерна, тобто
we
сучасна
had
українська сім'я. Вона має
webinar
такі виклики,
about a
дуже
modern
потужні
Ukrainian
виклики,
family.
пов'язані з тим, що люди
So the
опиняються
modern
в різних
family is
країнах,
facing a lot of
зірвані
powerful
сім'ї,
challenges
хтось
because
на фронті, хтось в тилу,
families
хтось
can be
вдома.
separated.
Це все
Family members may be
якось треба
located in
переживати.
different
Як це люди
countries,
переживають?
or some
З
of
того,
them
що я
are
бачу
in the
прямо
rear,
сьогодні,
others are in the front lines.
то
So
це якийсь такий
how
дуже
the
потужний
families are
ресурс.
coping with this? Yes,
Працювали
as I can
з
see,
лікарів, і серед
family
них
is a very
була
powerful
лікарка, яка
resource.
втратила свого
We used to
чоловіка
work with a group
на
of
фронті,
doctors.
які
So
часто
one of the
в
doctors
кількох
was a
воюють,
woman
діти,
who lost her husband on the front line,
і
and
вони
her
при
children
цьому
are at war,
цілком
in,
стабільно і
and
підтримують один одного. Тобто це,
they are
мені
a
здається,
very good and stable family. They support each other.
дуже гарно працює соціальна підтримка. Вона
And I
дає
think
можливість переживати
this works very well.
важкі,
And social
драматичні
support
речі. Наодинці це
allows
неможливо
people
пережити.
to survive some difficult, dramatic things, because it's very hard if you are on your own. Thank you.
Вікторія, будь ласка, у вас рука піднята.
Victoria, please.
Дякую. Я спробую коротенько.
Thank you. I will try to
Стосовно
be brief.
попередніх доповідачів
As for the previous
власного досвіду,
speakers,
я би що підтвердила на протязі
I can
двох
confirm
поколінь.
from my
Своєї
experience,
сім'ї у мене батько учасник
from two
декількох
generations
гарячих
in my
точок
family,
бойових
my
операцій
father
безпосередньо.
participated in military
Я вам
fighting in
скажу,
several
що
hot
є
spots,
моменти,
and I can tell you,
те, що ми говорили про контрольований
there
гнів,
are
да, і
some
направлений
moments
гнів там,
we
де
have
він
been talking
має
about
бути, там,
controlled and
де
contained
безпосередньо
anger,
є бойові
where
зіткнення.
it's relevant,
І
where it has to be
гнів,
during the
який
military fighting,
треба
and
стримувати,
there is
якщо ти
anger that you
знаходишся
have
серед
to
цивільних.
that you
І
have
тут,
to
мені
curb
здається, тепер
while
говорили
you are
про
among civilian people.
черепно-мозкові травми,
You
а
have
я
also
згадаю ще про
mentioned
залежності,
the concussions
які можуть накладатися,
and
да, і цей гнів перестає бути
injuries.
контрольованим,
And also
наприклад,
I would
серед
like to
цивільного
mention
населення.
the
І тоді,
addictions
де
that may
знаходять
contribute. So when
розраду,
it's
знаходять
difficult to
серед
contain your
побратимів.
anger among civilians.
І тоді
So,
розділяється сім'я,
people
йде в
can
одну
find the
сторону,
resort.
якщо немає цієї
Among
підтримки і
the-
розуміння, нема роботи
among
з
the military
сім'єю.
staff members,
А
among the colleagues.
побратими, вони розуміють, що відбувається з
The
цією
person
людиною,
stops
людина
looking at the
знаходить
family because
розраду
the
там.
family doesn't understand
Стосовно
them,
теперішнього нашого покоління
this
і наших
service member
хлопців,
can
я
find
мала справу з
understanding
хлопцями,
among
які
his
вже
peers.
були списані з ампутованими кінцівками. І ви знаєте, з
I
чим
used to work
стикнулися?
with
З аутоагресією. Тобто
who
та
have
агресія, про яку ви, здається, Марія,
who have
говорила,
been,
яка направлена була на
who have-
владу,
who have left the
на
army,
безпосередньо
and they also
їхнє
have cases
керівництво, яке не
of
підтримує чи ще щось,
auto-aggression.
на те, що їм тепер
They
треба
often
розуміти,
channel their
яким чином вони
aggression
будуть далі
against the
продовжувати
government.
своє
The
життя.
country is not supporting them any
Далі
longer.
вона,
They have to
звісно,
understand
направляється на
how
їхню
to
сім'ю, що
continue with their lives.
нічим хороше не
Then the aggression
закінчується,
is
тому що не
channeled
всі
again
витримують.
against
А
their family
взагалі вона
members,
направлена на
which has
самих
bad
себе, бо вони не
consequences.
знають, як
And
дати
very
собі
often the
раду і що
aggression is
далі
channeled
робити.
against themselves
І
because
оця
they don't know what to
аутоагресія,
do with
цей
themselves
гнів, да,
and how to
неконтрольований,
continue living.
неправильно
And
спрямований,
this anger,
він
this
руйнує багато чого.
auto-aggression
Стосовно бойових
very
операцій, я би
destructive.
сказала, що емоційний воїн
As,
мертвий воїн.
As
І
for the
про це тепер
hostilities,
говорили,
as
да,
for the
тобто там
fighting, I
дійсно
can
всі
say that
емоції
an emotional
заморожені.
warrior
Потім, коли
is
вони
as good as dead.
розморажуються,
You
там,
have to
де вони
freeze all your emotion
застосовуються,
in
отут би
combat.
треба навчити
But
правильно
then
в потрібні русла їх
we need to
спрямовувати.
train
У
people
мене коротко,
to
дякую.
unfreeze and channel their emotions into good path. Thank you.
Ігор, будь ласка.
Igor, please.
Добрий вечір всім.
Good
Я
evening,
Жосан Ігор,
everybody.
офіцер групи контролю бойового
Josan
стресу
Igor,
3-ї штурмової
officer of
бригади.
combat stress control
Я 2,5 роки
of the
в
3rd
піхоті прослужив,
brigade. I used to
пробув на
serve
лінії зіткнення,
2
десь у
years and a
мене
half in the
порядка
infantry.
70
I was
виходів
at the
було на
contact
лінію
line.
бойового зіткнення.
I
Тому
had about
трошки
70
знаю, як
operations,
це відчувати,
participated in about 70 operations on the contact line.
цю емоцію
I
гніву.
know
І
this
коли вона
feeling
дійсно
of anger, this
дає
emotion,
можливість
and when
захищати
it
свою
really gives you
країну
the possibility
і
to protect
не
your country
стримувати, скажімо, все, що в тебе є, для того,
and
щоб
not
знищувати ворога.
containing everything you have
Розкажу вам один приклад.
when you can
Я був
destroy the
командир
enemy.
взвода.
I can
У
give
мене
you one
було
example.
підпорядкування 30
I was
бійців,
a
тому
squad commander.
у мене там був один випадок, коли
There were
один з
30
цих 30 бійців
fighters
ніяк
in my
не міг
subordination,
піти
and one of the fighters
на лінію бойового зіткнення, напередок, як
wasn't
кажуть.
didn't go to
Хлопці
go
ж,
to
от, як там
didn't want to
розказував
go to the
Олег,
front line,
теж там його
and the
підтрунювали.
boys were joking at
І в
him,
один момент він
making
до мене
fun of
підходить,
him,
каже:
and
командир,
at some
все,
point
я
he comes
піду,
up to
якщо з
me
вами, то
and
я
he
піду.
says, Commander,
Я
I'm
говорю,
going
ну
to
все,
go
Андрію,
with you, together
зі
with
мною
you.
завтра виходиш.
I'm telling you, all right, Andrew,
Вийшли
tomorrow
ми
we
з
go
ним на
together.
лінію зіткнення,
So
пройшли
we both
там,
went to the
скажімо,
contact
такий
line.
непростий шлях
It
до
was a
самої
difficult
позиції.
way to go
І
to
що
the
ви думаєте,
position.
цей хлопчина,
And what do
який
you
там
think?
довгий час не міг там
This
вийти,
boy, for a long
він
time, he was
починає
afraid to
використовувати
go
цей
there,
гнів
and he
настільки
starts
яскраво,
using this anger
починає
in such a
працювати
bright
з
way.
3 видів
He
зброї,
starts shooting
включаючи
from
там
3 types
кулемет.
of weapons,
І
like
мені, навіть для мене це було таке
automatic
відкриття,
rifles,
розумієте, начебто
machine
я
gun.
знав цього
So
бійця,
this
хоча він
was
там
a
десь
surprise
за
for me.
місяць
I used to
до
know
цього
this
виходу
guy
прийшов до нас.
because one man
Він був із
he only came
новеньких
to
молодих
us
хлопців.
1 month
Але
before.
от саме,
He was
оцей
a
емоція гніву
novice,
йому давала
but this emotion of
якраз
anger
оцей карт-бланш, і
gave
він
him the
використовував
power,
це в боротьбі з
and
ворогом.
he was using it to
Плюс я
fight
хотів ще
the enemy.
додати
Also,
про
I would like to add a few words
дійсно оці
about the
прояви
really,
гніву, як в
about
мене, наприклад, я
the
2,5
expressions of
роки
anger. For
відбігав
me,
в піхоті,
I was in the infantry
і
for 2 years and a half.
зрозуміло, що мої там
And of course,
механізми, які я використовував
the
захисні,
mechanisms, the
бо в
protective
мене
mechanisms that
була
I used,
психологічна освіта, є,
because
і тому
I
мені
have a
трошки легше
background
може
in
було, як
psychology,
іншим,
so
але
probably
по собі те,
it
що
was a
мені там
bit
дівчина моя
easier for
іноді
me.
говорить, каже: слухай,
And
ну
my
ти став
girlfriend
все ж
sometimes
таки,
says,
ну таким
listen,
агресивним,
you have become so
розгнівуєшся дуже
aggressive,
швидко,
you
тобто
quickly
це все
resort
одно
to
накладає
anger.
у цю картину,
So anyway,
все ж таки події, і все, що
it has an impact on
відбувалось
you,
на лінії фронту, воно
and
все ж
everything that
таки
is
нікуди
happening
не
on the
піде,
front line
і воно буде
never
з бійцем,
disappears
з
anywhere.
людиною,
It's going to
навірно,
stay
все
with you
життя. Але ми
for
намагаємось
your
контролювати
entire
цю емоцію.
life. But
І, в
we are
принципі,
trying to
Її
control
можна
this emotion,
контролювати.
And
Але
in
не у
general,
всіх
it
це
can be
може і буде
controlled,
виходити
but
ідеально, да? Але
maybe not everybody can
вона
do this in
контрольована.
an ideal way, but it's possible
Дякую,
to control
дякую.
it. Thank you.
У мене все.
This is it.
Дякую. Оля, будь ласка, Оля – це наша волонтерка, яка збирала і систематизувала питання з реєстраційних форм, і вона їх розбила на декілька груп. Оля, будь ласка, озвучте. Я бачу, Оля також без світла сидить, ну так, у нас цікава ілюмінація сьогодні.
Дякую, мене не дуже добре видно, але сподіваюся, наші слухачі дуже цікавляться конкретними порадами, рекомендаціями, технологіями щодо роботи з гнівом і неконтрольованим гнівом. Можливо, ви можете дати короткі поради,
Our
наводки на
listeners are interested in learning how to work with uncontrolled anger. Could you give us advice on some methodological materials and resources to learn about this?
Carl, I can respond to that.
I'm sorry, I didn't fully understand the question.
Okay.
Okay, Leslie, could you repeat it for me?
So I think I think what I understood was that they were interested in some resources that we might have available with regards to working with anger, very particularly uncontrolled anger. So like the extreme, and I was just suggesting that a lot of this discussion has been really helpful to understand the purpose of anger, the function, but also that there's a behavioral piece, there's an emotional piece, there's a physiological piece, there's a cognitive piece, and really, and there's a huge component of awareness. And this idea of when, I think someone made the comment of an emotional soldier or someone who's, kind of moving through the world driven by emotion, often if the emotion is anger, it typically is not going to work well. And so I think we do have lots of treatments here that we work with that are really looking at anger on the continuum, again, the very out of control aggression, but even the more subtle kind of, checking out, shutting down, being irritable all the time, not being able to kind of engage in more soft emotions, sadness, love, but then looking at both behavioral treatments, cognitive treatments, physiological treatments. So most of our psychological treatments really are capturing all aspects of the anger. And I think all of the treatments that we have been using in the US kind of follow a similar model in terms of treating the anger, but first and foremost, understanding the function of the anger and really not just assuming that all anger is bad. And I think this conversation we've been having today, I think has been very helpful to really highlight the value of the emotion of anger, but then also when it becomes problematic, when aggression behaviors become no longer helpful, both in the military, I would imagine, if it's uncontrolled, and certainly at home when they can't turn it off, and really kind of the range of experiences that people are having. But I would say most of our treatment models start with, first and foremost, really kind of respecting the emotion of anger and the value that it can bring. And then also talking about how it's perhaps problematic in many areas, both when you're actively in a combat zone, but also when you're home. And someone mentioned social support, and I just want to really echo that social support is the most consistent protective factor for any individual in combat, and anger can erode that. And so we really want to be thoughtful about that piece.
Leslie, do you have resources that you could send us that we could share?
Yeah, so we have certainly anger protocols here that we use and that we've used with our veteran population. We have one that the National Center for PTSD has developed. So I can certainly send some of those protocols. They're what we call in the public domain, so they're not copyrighted or anything like that. So I can send them over to you, Carl, and we could certainly send them. And there's group interventions we do. I think with the military, I think there's a lot of value in a shared experience and the fact that, it helps normalize that a lot of our folks are struggling with this. And so sometimes we do a group intervention and sometimes it would be individual. And I also think that we do it also with couples and family members because the idea of the education for the family members and the partner becoming someone that is leveraged as part of the healing rather than the problem dividing the couple. And so we have, a couple of different models and I can maybe, Carl, share these with you and James and you can be thoughtful about which ones feel the most helpful to help with folks.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Оля, почекайте, давайте Володимира послухаємо. Володимир, у вас коментар
Дуже
до цього?
дякую.
Volodymyr, did you want to add anything?
Прошу, Леслі. Дуже короткий коментар щодо практичного аспекту
I wanted to add briefly as regards the practical aspects of working with the aggressive behavior. It is good to use practical training, different practical games like martial arts or any kind of competition games where people learn to use their force in a controlled way. And one of our colleagues conducted such aggression control training courses before the large-scale invasion of Ukraine. These courses were delivered to people working in business, but now they have been adapted to be delivered for the servicemen so that through the role games they can learn how to use the power, the energy of anger. And one needs to be trained in this. And so such practical training is the best thing you can do. And our research shows to find the best ways to train people practically in this.
Oleg, I would be interested in how the Ukrainian military thinks about this in terms of training unit leaders in how to deal with and manage anger. Again, recognizing that not everyone is going to have access to psychological services, and often it's unit leaders, even at the small unit level, who have to deal with some of these issues.
Добре. Олі, які ще питання були? Прочитайте, будь ласка.
І ще одне питання, яке дуже часто зустрічалося. Які можуть бути напрямки опрацювання гніву на командирів і на керівництво, на державу?
What are the ways to develop training for the unit commanders and also of working with the with people being angry at unit commanders and country leadership. I think people should learn how to manifest their attitude, because Of course, the military do not have time to use the civil methods of influencing the government leadership. But at least they can learn how to make their voice heard, even though they do not have so many possibilities. But they should learn how to work correctly with the unit commanders, because the unit commanders should also learn how to communicate with their subordinates. Because the subordinates might have a lot of anger caused by the combat, but also the anger after reading the articles written by unprofessional journalists and article based on the buzzwords. And communication with a unit commander is a good thing, but we still have to see how this communication channel begins to function well, and it should function from the grassroots level upwards, otherwise it will not work.
Дякую. Більшість інших аспектів, про які запитували наші читачі, були озвучені в ході дискусії. Дякую.
Mentioned by our listeners, they have been already discussed during the presentations and discussions.
Олеже, візьмеш слово? Ага, Олег, я бачу.
Олег, would you like to take the word? Other Олег.
Дякую, я підняв руку, бо не бачив тут кнопок. Думаю, може,
Thank you, I raised the hand because I couldn't find the controls on the bottom of the screen.
В моїй практиці, то це виглядає така дуже потужна реакція,
As
сильніша, ніж
regards
просто
my
агресія,
experience,
яка виникає,
the
коли
anger
людина
I
відчуває
see
таку
is
загрозу,
so much
порушення
powerful,
свого відчуття
it's
нормальності,
more
якоїсь
than
нормальності
aggression,
свого стану.
and it happens when
І
the
якщо
very
тривалий час
normality
людина
of
знаходиться в
the
ситуації,
role
яка загрозливо впливає
of a person is violated, and if
таке
this
порушення своєї
person
нормальності, тоді відбувається
continues
ситуація, вже така клінічна,
for a long time in this situation, then
і ти
it
просто говориш, або ти
could
просто
end
там
up
хтось
in a
підходить і
clinical
просить закурити, а в неї в
situation
голові
when you
лунає
just
думка, я зараз тобі
say
голову
two
скручу, або
words
вночі
to a
він
person, but
просинається
that
і
person
зупиняє себе
immediately
на бажанні вбити людину, що
thoughts
спить
of
поряд.
killing you, or
І
that
це якби,
person might wake
це
up at
також реакція,
night
якась така гнів,
feeling
але це така
the
несвідома,
desire
і
to
вона
kill
контрольована, але
someone.
вона несвідома, і вона,
It is
власне, не викликана цими
controlled, but these
обставинами.
reactions are
І то
unconscious.
вже, такі ситуації потребують вже
And
якогось
in
відновленого
such
спеціального лікування.
situations, some
Я
special
би
treatment
тут
should be
дивився
provided.
в продовження цього на ситуації такі стосункові, які викликають почуття гніву.
Another
І
thing is when
в
anger
моїй практиці тоді, коли
manifests in the course
у людини
of
багато гніву, і ця
relationship
ситуація
with
ніяк не
another
вирішується,
person.
то це може
When
бути або
somebody
просто
has
вибух,
a lot
такий,
of
який руйнує просто все, або саму
anger,
людину, або оточення.
then it could end up
Або людина переходить в стан
exploding and
такого
destroying
упокорення,
everything
такої
around
несуб'єктності
him.
зовсім, якби нічого не
Or
залежить,
it
там,
could
ми
end
раби,
up
так, я
in
нічого не
an
зміню, і
absolutely
це
passive
такий гнів сприймає
condition
всередині.
when one believes I
Тоді, якщо
can't
говорити
change
про варіант
anything
того,
and
як в моїй
everything
практиці
is
оцей гнів він
impossible.
розв'язувався за допомогою командирів також, то це коли
In
командири
some
разом із людиною,
cases,
яка зараз уже
the
має
situation
серйозне
with
переживання гніву,
anger
вона
has been dealt
включалася
with
в
by
спільне дослідження того,
commander
як оця енергія
units.
зараз може
And it happens thanks to
створити
the
нове уявлення про нормальність.
unit
Якби
commander
разом вони
and
досліджують, що таке
the
нормальність в даних умовах.
servicemen
людина розуміє, як
researching
командир це
together
розуміє, і вони спільно це
what
досліджують.
is
І коли це
this new
відбувається, тоді
normality,
сильно
how the
змінюється
commander
відчуття
understands it, how the serviceman
того,
understands
що
it, and if
можливого,
they
власне. Людина тоді бере участь сама в
research
тому,
it
щоб
together, then
покращити
the serviceman
свою суб'єктивну
takes
нормальність разом з
part
кимось. І тоді
in
гнів спадає. Оце якби
improving
питання до того,
its
як це розв'язувати.
his own subjective normality, and that's the way it has been resolved in those
Це коли
cases.
старші так слухають, власне.
So,
Слухають, пояснюють,
it
намагаються разом
happened in the cases when the
знаходити якісь
commanders
виходи.
were able to listen and try to look for solutions together.
Це все.
That's all from me.
Dear all, I think we are finishing according to our planned time. Thank you for participation. I think it was very emotional topic as anger, and maybe in the future topics we will also get some other emotions and include them in pretty multi-phase discussion, in my opinion. So we were talking about different levels, like personal anger, group anger, unit anger, family anger, etc. We were talking about different dimensions of the anger, different layers, like physiological, behavioral, cognitive, emotional, etc., etc. Positive, negative aspects. So pretty comprehensive discussion. And thank you for today. And from September, we will have such sort of discussion regularly every second week. And hopefully we will have some more international and especially American folks. And we are working to make these events more advertised, more vivid for broader audience. Thank you very much. Have a nice evening, night, day, morning. And and please register for the future topics and send questions and ideas and requests. We will gather all information. Short advertisement from since September for a few discussion. We will have principles like approximate topic. It will be principles and practices in the combat of Ukraine. So we will gather all ideas and all good practices that is going on, even they are not evidence-based or any sort of evidence. But if they are practiced, probably they have some common sense inside. Okay, thank you very much, Carl, James, Leslie. It was nice to meet you.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Leslie. Thanks, Jim, Oksana. Thank you, Oleg. Thank you. Thanks, everyone, for the comments and the sharing your experiences. Wonderful. Thank you so much.